Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Senate Judiciary this morning. We've got a couple of bills posted. I want to say right up front that we've had a change of schedule upstairs made in the wee hours last night as we finished up. The floor leader upstairs has decided to gavel in early because this is one of the final days for bills to be considered up there. So unfortunately, we'll be under a little bit of a time crunch this morning. We hope to get through House Bill 26, Emergency Protective Services, the effective period. And if possible, we'll sure take a look at House Bill 27, DFS and law enforcement cross-reporting. So let's get started. Director, come on up. This committee, this goes into Title 35, the Public Health and Safety. Chapter 20 is Adult Protective Services. Paragraph A under these statutes is when a vulnerable adult is suffering abuse, neglect, lacks capacity. At that point, DFS, the law enforcement, the DA can petition the court to take care of this vulnerable adult. When you get to paragraph C, that's what we're going to learn from Director Schmidt, what this bill does. And so, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Corin Schmidt, and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Department of Family Services. And this bill really is just to give the department a little bit more time to do what we do in most of our adult protective services cases, which is a lot of case management, connection to services in the community. What we find in these cases where there is a larger need, a more extreme need for services, that 3 days to put all of those connections together isn't long enough. So we find ourselves going back to the court, petitioning the court to extend the timeline up to the 30 days. This just gives us time to focus more on connecting services rather than going back and forth to court. Just a little bit of education. These are the cases that are the most extreme, and we don't have a lot of them. But what we do know is that we're seeing our adult protective services caseload increase. About 25% of the calls we receive at the agency are regarding adults. So we are starting to see that trend line go up. So I think getting ahead of what we know will probably be more of these issues is going to, I think, be helpful for the department, for law enforcement who we partner with, for the courts, and for the county attorneys who have to do the filing on our behalf.
So Director Schmidt, a quick question as we take a look at the 30,000-foot view. What sort of pushback did you get during the task force work? I've been a little surprised to have some people a little concerned about this one. What did you hear?
Mr. Chairman, some of the comments that have been made in regard to this bill and maybe concerns about this bill really come from how much oversight should the state have of these cases. Yeah. And that's why I think it's important to note that this doesn't happen all that frequently. Yeah. But also, I do think maybe there's some confusion about how we work in the adult protective services space compared to a child. In regard to a child protective services, there is a provision of the law that lets law enforcement or medical personnel take protective services, and then that child is given to the department for placement. We do not have, the state does not have that authority to do that in adult protective services. So we will never take protective custody of an adult. This is just the only way that that the courts can say, look, vulnerable adult, you need to work with the agency so that they can help you get connected to some of these services. And that's really all it is. I do know there's been some concerns about firearms and taking custody of a firearm. We've never done that. That's not occurred in the time that I'm familiar with, and so I'm not sure that's that's a concern. And if that conversation were to be had, it would be a determination of the court. It would not be a determination of the agency.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Committee, any questions of Director Schmidt? It is. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Wrigley Field. It's a beautiful day for baseball. Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask, particularly with vulnerable adult, what do you do with them and what are the financial consequences to the adult if you force them into some service situation that they need to pay for? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Director Schmidt.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, I think that's a great question. One of the primary actions that the department will take in these extreme cases is to look for a guardian. Because what we're finding is some of those adults do not have the capacity to make the decisions on their own. Right. And a lot of times these cases come to our attention because there's been potentially some financial exploitation by perhaps a caregiver or someone else. So that guardianship is one of the first things we'll do. And that does take a little bit of time, which is then the request for the extended timeline. But we look for family immediately to try to connect that vulnerable adult to somebody who will help them make those decisions. I'm not familiar with any time that we've connected them with a service that might require more money. A lot of times these vulnerable adults aren't acquiring the services that are available to them through their community. For example, Meals on Wheels. We may find a vulnerable adult who's not eating. And in that case, what we would do is try to get them connected to Meals on Wheels or the Senior Services Center, who really provides a lot of services to this population.
It's amazing, even one visit a day, how big that can be. So, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I visited with a couple of our providers, community providers, and they were, just a comment, I guess, more than a question, they were just very excited about this. They felt like it was going to be something that would help them because many times they felt like they didn't have the time to get them to the services they needed or to figure out what was really going on with them. And like you said, to run down family members or whatever else. So they were very, very supportive of this bill. So just a comment.
Thank you. Anything else for Director Schmidt? Questions? Anything else?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that people are seeing the change from 3 days to 14 days and thinking, about a really abusive government that would,
sequester somebody.
Yeah, like throw them in jail or restrict their movements or, and I would like maybe the director, and help me, I'm reaching here, maybe if you talked about circumstances that you usually encounter and how one of these situations progresses, and then the rights that the individual still retains. It's not like, so, and I'll just tip it off a little bit. We have become increasingly an isolated society, and we have fewer young people and fewer families that all live together, or where there are children close to elderly people. It's just elderly people are more alone than they used to be, and others, they get pretty isolated. We're not as good at taking care of as our neighbors I used to be, and families they're not as big. They don't have as many resources as they used to be in terms of human time.
And sometimes they're thousands of miles away.
They're distant, and people get into a situation where things deteriorate for them, and they're met with without help, they continue to deteriorate. But sometimes it's very simple things. There's a health condition that doesn't get attended to. There is a financial situation that doesn't get attended to. There is stress and other factors in somebody's life that becomes overwhelming, especially when you don't have other resources and you feel so alone. And that's where we're getting at this. It's really to give us authority to do more than say, well, we've got you for 3 days and we can fix all this. We can't fix all this in 3 days. And we're not fixing anything, we're helping.
That's a great point, Senator. And really, I remember we talked a little bit about weekends and situations where, and Director, maybe you can speak to that you indicated it initially that you have to keep going back to the court to get a little bit more time so that you can get the help they need, right?
That's it then, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and to speak a little bit to Senator Case's points, I think a good example of why we would need the time is that we often encounter vulnerable adults who are severely self-neglecting. So to his point, families wanting, or elderly people wanting to stay at home and wanting to stay at home at all costs. And we want them to stay at home for as long as they're able. But it does require a certain level of assistance, whether that be through senior citizen centers. You know, we try to limit our involvement. We really want to make those connections and then step out because we understand that that people would rather connect to community than they would to maybe some state agency. So that's our primary objective. But if we encounter somebody who is at home, we've received numerous calls and we look into it. And what we find is maybe a vulnerable adult who could be a diabetic with lots of self-neglect, who is finding themselves in a terrible health situation because they've neglected their diabetes and really does require a level of Medicare or medical attention. What we'll find out then sometimes is that they haven't ever applied for Medicaid. So they're uninsured, they're sitting at home. So we will help that person then qualify for Medicaid so that they can access the necessary services that they may need. What gets really tricky is though these adults get to tell us no, right? We will not get in the business of arguing with somebody over really dumb decisions. But what we will do is make a case that without some sort of intervention, this person is going to be in grave danger. So it's a fine line. It's a very fine line. And there's honestly a lot of frustration in these cases because we recognize that adults get to have the right to make decisions. But there is a time where sometimes those decisions out of self-neglect or some other situation, somebody might need to help them. And that's where these services come in, the emergency services.
Thank you, Director. Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was one question I did have before I made my comment, and I had it underlined here, but when they talk about the allegations of the petition shall be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, explain what that means. I'm not a lawyer, so what does preponderance mean? Large amount of evidence?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Different levels, right, Director?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I'm not an attorney either. But I think if I remember correctly, it's beyond reasonable doubt is the highest threshold of evidence. The preponderance of evidence is a little lower than that. So it doesn't have to be without reasonable doubt. There can be some gray area in preponderance. Is there enough evidence that shows that this person does need the oversight of the court in order to get them connected to the services? I think it's the same level of evidence we have with child protection cases.
Committee, if we're getting close, I'm sensing that we can maybe go to a discussion on the bill, and that's what we're going to do first. So, Director Schmidt, please stay put, and if there's anyone who would like to testify, good morning, by the way. House Bill 26, Emergency Protective Services, effective period. Is there anyone online here? Anyone like to testify on this? Okay, we'll close public testimony. Committee, do pass by Senator Case. House Bill 26, take roll, Pierre, please.
Wait, I want to change it to 11 and a half days and 6 hours.
I'm sorry, that dies for lack of a second. Okay, Pierre, go ahead.
Senator Case,
Aye.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler,
Aye.
Chairman Linden.
Aye. Committee, while we have Director Schmidt here, let's dive into House Bill 27. Director, if you would, DFS and law enforcement cross-reporting. Chance we could maybe deal with this one too. Pretty simple fix here. This is DFS and law enforcement cross-reporting. Take it away. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this bill is really just about closing loops and communication. As mentioned in previous testimony, there's a lot of connections to resources that we make through our Adult Protective Services cases. And this situation that we're talking about here happens sometimes a little bit before we get into those extreme situations with emergency services. So under the current statute, we report to law enforcement when we've engaged with a person or we've received a call that of a vulnerable adult that might require a little bit more look. Law enforcement at the same time does not have to report to us when they do the same. And what we know is that in these cases, it takes a lot of communication around these vulnerable adults. Again, we don't take protective custody, so it really is about resource access. And if law enforcement were reporting back to us when they investigate, then what we can do is step in with some of those resources. But sometimes law enforcement is going to be looking at a higher threshold of abuse or neglect or self-neglect. And may decide then after that engagement that there's really no reason to move further. But if we know about the case, then we can go and offer voluntary services.
At least it puts it on the radar screen, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
This too was brought to the committee, fellow senators, and I remember this conversation. I thought it made a lot of sense, but any questions on House Bill 27? Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. My only question was going to be basically in the past, do they generally not report, or do they just hit and miss, or is it kind of well, we don't think it's that bad, so, whereas this will require them to, correct?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, and that was a point that was made when this bill came up on the House side, was that it just provides instruction. And it's just part of the law, and therefore it then compels, if it's not happening, it'll compel law enforcement. We rely heavily on law enforcement in these situations because when somebody encounters a vulnerable adult, really some of the first calls they'll make is to law enforcement. And through adult protective service teams in communities, in some cases, those relationships are very strong. In other communities, not so much. So this just gives another way of, it's not coercing, but certainly just brings to the attention of law enforcement that a conversation with us might be important.
Any other questions of the Director? Okay, go ahead,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman?
Case.
So I just, I want to point out something. I think people are thinking this goes the other way, that if Department of Family Services is providing service to an individual and they see something that might be illegal or something like that, that they're going to rat out the person to law enforcement. See, that's not the duty here. The duty that's here is someone that's already encountered law enforcement in some manner. Law enforcement, and they need help. Yeah. Law enforcement is trying to get them help. And not a law enforcement solution, not confiscation of any weapons, not locking them up in jail. They're trying to get, it's like when a kid gets in trouble and they encounter law enforcement And rather than take them down to the jail, law enforcement drives them home and has a little talk with the parents. It's more like that than it is some kind of legal confiscation issue. And so this is not a black helicopter bill.
Senator Case, I think that's a place where the director might want to join in. That, as you mentioned on the previous bill, that the department just does not confiscate things, right? You want to speak to that, Director?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Case, no, the department is not interested in going in and confiscating and moving into somebody's life. We don't have enough resources to do that, and we do really respect the autonomy of adults. But from a prevention standpoint, we also know that if we provide services, if we can engage the client into services, it reduces their chance of having to go to higher levels of care. And so it really is about prevention. And that's a lot of what we do in adult protective services cases. Most of the cases are about just providing resources or connections to resources. Very few cases go to this extreme. And quite honestly, if the adult doesn't want to take part in our services, they don't have to. And that happens frequently as well. We can offer to have Meals on Wheels or Connect with Senior services, and they can refuse, and we will acknowledge that. So no, we're not trying to invade anybody's life, but we do understand that from just a humanity perspective, sometimes, a little bit of work and connection might go a long way.
Well, this bill just feels like Wyoming, like community, and it just makes sense that if the department comes across a situation, getting a hold of the local sheriff to say, hey, by the way, Mrs. Smith.
It's actually vice versa.
Yeah.
It's
And
if
vice
law enforcement encounters
And
the
it's law
situation.
enforcement back the other way.
Yeah.
But, that's where I was leading. I think anytime we can promote better communication, it just makes sense. Senator Furphy.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going back to the days in banking. When we see one of our customers that has a caregiver, and it looks like the caregiver is abusing that person financially, etc. So the bank would sometimes call law enforcement and say, we think we have an issue. Quite honestly, law enforcement, if they've got bigger issues, they're really not focused on this. So somehow we need to get that information to the department that has the resources to check on this person. So I'm just going reverse, sort of, and that is a problem. Thank you.
Yeah, no, very good point, Senator. Well said.
Yeah,
Anything else for the director? Senator Case?
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to be perfectly clear. Thank you. Director, this is law enforcement reporting to you, right? There's nothing in this paragraph that talks about a duty of you to report to law enforcement, is there?
Yeah, that was my mistake. I was
Yeah.
just speaking to the communication piece, but go ahead, Director.
And then my point is, law enforcement has a basket of tools. These guys have more gentle tools.
Mhm. Yeah.
Director Smith.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, in the paragraph before the one that you see is subsection D, that speaks to the department's requirement to report to law enforcement when we investigate.
And so there's an existing duty, but this kind of makes it mutual and gives us tools that are outside the law enforcement tool bag.
Encourages both ways.
Yes.
Good clarification, Senator. Thank you. Anything else for the director? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to testify on House Bill 27 this morning? Any public testimony? Anybody online? I'll close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on House Bill 27? Senator Schuler moved the bill. Discussion? Pierre, please take roll on House Bill 27.
Senator Case,
Aye.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler. Chairman Linden.
Aye. So House Bill 26 and House Bill 27 will both go to the State Senate. Director Smith, thank you. It's always good to see you. Thanks for all your hard work.
And I did say this in testimony, that this was a bill that came out as a result of now. Of course, I think I represent it was something that was.
I also should have referenced that better, Director. Really great work by that task force. And of course, those bills came to the Judiciary Committee. So have a great day out there, everyone. We are adjourned.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
If it go this smooth, we'd be pretty happy.